Keith Ochwat and I go back quite a ways. I've been a long time admirer of what he's done at Show and Tell. I will let him eventually explain what Show and Tell is. We actually met for the first time at Slam Dance in person back in January. I was there as a producer of My Omaha, which was premiering there, and Keith is not far from there, and we did a sort of combined Show and Tell D-Word in person, face to face. And we just, I don't know, it was just really fun to, get to know Keith a little bit better. And we thought it would be fun to come on and, just do a little more informal conversation about, this and that. And of course, in the doc world, this means funding and that means distribution. But we thought we'd go, and we'll definitely get to that for sure. But, we thought we'd just kind of get a little bit more chatty and see where the conversation went. And I'll allow plenty of time, at least a half hour, for you guys to ask questions. And it's really kind of an ask anything of Keith. So, first of all, how are you doing, Keith? I mean, you were impacted by the fire. You're coming from a barn. That is not where you have lived in the past. How did you wind up there? How did the fires impact you? Because you were living in LA, right?
Yeah, so well, first of all, thank you, Doug, for having me, and thank you, Julie. Thank you to the D word. I remember the room I was in when I joined the D word for the first time, for the first time when I joined, and it was for my first documentary, and I thought I was like, oh, I'm not just a hobbyist filmmaker just trying to make my first film. I'm going to try to be a serious professional. I need to join the D word and I need to meet other filmmakers. And I lived in Sacramento at the time, my hometown. And I thought I need to I don't live somewhere where you can just walk down the street and bump into a filmmaker. I need to be more connected. And the D word was such a great resource for me. And to meet you in person after all these years, Doug, was just so wonderful, and give you a hug. And, I've gotten to know Marjan over the years, and it's just such a wonderful group, wonderful leadership, wonderful community. So thank you for being here. It's always such a pleasure. And, right now I'm joining you from Ojai, which is an hour and 20 minutes north of LA. And I own a home in Altadena, which was one of the two neighborhoods ravished by the fires in January in Los Angeles. And it kind of shocks me how many people around the world knew about those fires. I was talking to a customer service person. I always like to ask where they are in the world, and this person was in the Philippines in Manila, and she was like, "Yeah, that's so terrible. I'm sorry to hear that." There was like a shipping issue with something, and I was like, "You know about this?" So it was a very scary time in January and full of tumult. And then we ended up here because we have a baby daughter, and our neighborhood is now tainted by some toxins like lead because of all the old homes that burned. So we're here. Normally, for 5 years since I started Show and Tell, I'd always have some version of my wife's art in my background, and I'd be at my home office or my office in Pasadena, the Show and Tell headquarters. But now I'm in a barn. I call it my fundraising and distribution workshop, and this is where I'll be for probably a year as my neighborhood is kind of getting further along in the cleanup before we head back. But the truth is, I think what's happened to me is I don't know, it's a microcosm. It's a metaphor maybe for what so much of us are going through in the disruption and kind of you just got to have the will to keep going. I hosted my first webinar a week after the fires from my friend's spare bedroom where we were staying. And I'll tell you, bouncing around with the baby house to house for 2 weeks is not a fun thing to do, not good for your sleep rhythms. Um, but it was with Christy from Kinema, and I wanted to do the webinar because, I didn't want to cancel it and I wanted to feel connected. I think the thing about a natural disaster is you feel very isolated. And I wanted to be connected to my show and tell community. And it felt so good, even though it felt a little overwhelming. And Christy was so sweet. And, and I think what Kinema does is fantastic. What we do at Show and Tell, I'm very proud of. And what I wanted to show, and Christy wanted to in that webinar too, is we're really all trying to work together to support and uplift the documentary community. I know the D-Word's a big part of that. Because it's a hard time. It's not just a hard time for me and my family, but it's a hard time for all of us. My friends at PBS are struggling right now. Um, I bumped into on a native garden tour last weekend a reporter at NPR, and he's afraid for his job, one of the economics reporters, and he's got two kids, and it's a scary time hearing what's happening with NEA grants being clawed back and paused in the middle of a disbursement. It's just a nightmare scenario that I don't know anyone took so seriously. Leading up to the Trump administration taking control. And so I think it's a hard time. It's a hard time to see so many people struggling because of the politics in our country, but it was a hard time before the election and before January 20th. It was hard because streamer support has really changed. And we see a lot of distributors getting acquired and going out of business. But I do think there's a lot of reason for optimism, Doug, and I think that's one thing that drives me and why I'm working out of a barn and trying to do what I do at Show and Tell. And we've hosted now 170 webinars. We have almost 10,000 filmmakers in our broader global community, and I just feel like we all need each other right now. And I've recently joined. I feel like I've been stepping up, trying to step up my engagement with our documentary community. I've joined DPA recently and GIPA, the Global Impact Producer Alliance, and like I want to be more involved. And I think in difficult times, that's kind of what I've desired. And I think for all of you, I'd recommend you lean into our community as well as we try to find our way forward in this unique and challenging time. But there's a lot of reason for optimism too. Documentary viewership from a Netflix viewership study that was done from 2022 to 2024 was up 30%. Documentary demand for documentary is up. It's not down, but the distribution models have changed a lot, and that's kind of what I'm focused on helping filmmakers figure out and excited to talk about today.
Well, we will definitely get to that and get back to the disruption because that's really key. But what you say reminds me that look, I've been in this business since like I think I started my first film in '87. 13 quick math, 40, wait, 30, 38 years. It's always been, funding has always been hard. Distribution has always been hard. But there's some unique challenges going on today for sure that we want to get back to. But before then, a little personal stuff. How's fatherhood? How has that changed you in terms of your work, your life?
I think one thing that parents have told me before I became a dad, my daughter Petra is 21 months old now. But people say you have less patience for bullshit. You are more guarded with your time. You're more focused in the time that you work because you frankly can work less. And I've found all those things to be true. And I think I feel more focused in some ways. And then in some ways I feel more tired and less focused. Like she's got a couple of vaccines a couple of days ago and she was up almost all night with a fever. And so, but I just remind myself how lucky I am. And that's, I think, a key part of what's been a guiding light during this hard time is just I'm lucky. I've got a wonderful wife and daughter, and I'm in Ojai, and which is, if anyone knows, is a lovely place. So I don't have it so bad for a fire refugee. But I think also I feel really lucky to be doing the work I'm doing too. Like if I think if I didn't care about my work, I would probably becoming a dad. I don't know, a father. I don't know that I would. I don't know if I'd want to continue doing it. I'd probably try to reduce my expenses, sell my house, and just play with my baby all day. But I love what I do, and so that keeps me engaged, because webinar I do, every hour I spend writing something, or circle session I host is like an hour I'm not riding my little bicycle with Petra or playing in the meadow with her. So I think there's that focus that comes, and also that sense of forcing you to kind of decide what's really important to you.
Yeah. Um, in that little spare time that you have, or before you became a parent, I mean, what do you most like doing outside of work?
Mm. Well, I love being outdoors. I ran my first marathon in December, which was great. I'm so glad I did because I got to run get to know my neighborhood in Altadena so well, all the mountain trails and all that are now gone. So that was wonderful. Running a marathon and finishing it. I love to rock climb. I like to be in nature. My wife and I are both nature worshipers, so that's one reason we went to Ojai versus another part of LA was, hey, we have a chance to be surrounded by oak trees and native plants, and we live on the Ventura River Preserve, and so I like to be outdoors. I like to be around animals. I like to be, it gives me calm. I love to watch birds. There's like nesting birds all over our porch right now. So these are the things that give me peace and relaxation when I'm not working, getting all wound up.
You wound up. So when you were a young tyke, speaking of kids, when you were a young kid, and what did you want to be when you grew up? And how did, what got you into film?
I've never taken a documentary production class. I didn't go to film school. I thought I was going to be a natural resource attorney. I did a stint on Capitol Hill, working for legislators, working under Leon Panetta, who worked in the Clinton and Obama administrations. I thought I was going to be an attorney. I was actually studying for the law school entry exams, the LSAT, when I decided to go to Mongolia and shoot my first documentary, what became my first documentary, having no idea where it was going to go. So I always saw myself as, trying to do something of purpose. I'm not really that money motivated, counterintuitively, because that's all I talk about with the show and tell communities, how to make money with your film. But making money to me with film is about career sustainability, so you don't have to go making Toyota commercials to make your docs. But for me, it was, trying to do something good. And so yeah, I wanted to be an attorney is kind of what I thought. And I do admit I do have a little gift for gab, and I love to talk. My wife has to pull out the
You?
my wife like has she says when we have to leave dinner party or something, she'll like grab the wood. She's like, I need to get the big wooden, like hook and like take you out because I just love talking. And it's so fun is my wife's an extrovert too, but in a different way. She's a lot more concise with her words, but my daughter is much more like me. She just talks and talks and talks, and it's just so fun to fun to watch.
I'll just say you're a very easy interview, Keith. Just ask a question, wind you up, and sit back, have some coffee.
I haven't even had my coffee. This is water right now. So,
Um, so it's funny when like when I interview editors, for instance, I always ask them like what are their favorite films because it gives me a real sense of what their tastes are and their aesthetic.
mm.
So what are some of your favorite films?
Oh man,
What are, or the films that most influenced you, made you feel like I kind of want to do that too.
I mean the one that to me I don't think documentaries are made in a vacuum. Like the film itself is not made in a vacuum. I love knowing the backstory. I love knowing the context in which it was made because I've made films, especially verite films. I know how much oh God, how much of us goes into that. So I love to know the backstory. So my favorite film of all time, and really what made me want to be a documentary filmmaker was actually, I believe, the first documentary I ever made. That was Nanuka the North by Robert Flaherty. And I love that film as a film. And I think it's really, I think it's really well done. Great verite film. Verite films are generally my favorite. But maybe as important as the film itself. Um, following Nanook, kind of a family leader in a tribe in the Arctic, 110 years ago it was produced. But what I love about the film and the why it's always been a guiding light for me, and I've watched it recently, like I watch it regularly, because it's not just the film, it's the story. Robert Flaherty, one of the first documentary filmmakers, really the first documentary filmmaker, depending on how you define it. He had finished Nanook of the North. He had spent all this time up north. He had raised sponsorship money to go make the film, and he spent, I believe, a year of his life in the Arctic. As an American, that's pretty, before, Gore-Tex, that's pretty intense. And he finished editing, cutting on film, taping it together, stitching it together, highly flammable. And when he was having his congratulatory cigarette in the kitchen of his house, he burned all the cans and destroyed his film. And that would crush any of us. Imagine a hard drive crashing if you only had one copy of your picture lock film after years.
Many filmmakers in the fires lost their art,
Absolutely.
all their
You don't,
work.
you
Yeah.
don't even have to stretch your imagination. And it's the most crushing, it's such a crushing thought. And he did it again. He made the film again. And he said in interviews that because of the trust he had, and that was also another lesson for me, was like how to cast and how to build trust with your subjects, especially for a verite style documentary. To me, it was so important to hear Robert not only decide to make his film again with this, basically make the same story, but to hear him say it was actually a better film. You probably would not have been talking about my film or watching it 100 years later. For years later, he said, if I didn't make it that second time as hard as it was. And that perseverance, that sort of attitude was such a guiding light for me. So I love the film, but I love the story behind it. Werner Herzog's another favorite of mine. Barbara Koppel is a hero of mine. But yeah, I love verite films where someone really sticks around long enough and builds enough trust and gets enough access to see something spectacular happen.
Yeah. It's funny, I never grew up wanting to be a documentary filmmaker. I saw Citizen Kane at a formative age. I think I was 17. Just my young mind was blown. I mean, it's like, oh, there's somebody behind the camera who actually creates these things, and I wanted to be that. And then many years later, still trying to figure out how you become a director
Mm.
without money. I saw Sherman's March, Ross McElway's
Mm.
March. And back in those days, I mean, it was like a full theater, Bleecker Street Cinema on a Friday night, completely full, hilarious, laughing their heads off. And I went like, wow, documentaries can be every bit as entertaining and personal, as auteur driven, as it were, as fiction films. And I thought, wow, I think that felt doable as opposed to breaking into fiction, which seemed really, really tough.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
how did you get into this field then? I mean, you said
Oh,
you and just picked up a camera and
yeah,
shot.
it
Did you have a
really was a
plan? Did
no.
you? Okay.
Absolutely not. It was a very wing. It's my first film was called Roughing It, and Roughing It Mongolian. It was about Mongolian nomads, and we produced it in 2006. And I was motivated to make that film not because I wanted to be a filmmaker, but because I love to travel. I'm biracial. My mom is from Seoul, South Korea. She was 30 when she came to America, and I grew up in what at the time felt like a weird house. My house always smelled like kimchi. You had to take off your shoes, and I was, my first memories were in the Philippines because my dad was in the Air Force, and so we traveled, and so I knew from a young age of a bigger world, and I'm so excited to introduce Petra to that as well. At a young age, but I knew the world was big and I knew it was diverse and different. And I loved that and was curious about that. So during college, I did a lot of travel in kind of weird, like Slovakia and Slovenia and places I didn't go to I didn't go to, no offense, Guy, I didn't go to Paris until I was much older, which I love. But
Sorry to interrupt, but what did you major in college? And
I
where did
studied natural resource
you,
business.
okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
studied
and
natural
where?
resource policy at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and they don't even have a film program there, as far as I know. Well, Sky might correct me on that, but I, I, I never have taken, I've never taken a film 101 class. I've never done anything like that. Everything came from going to Mongolia, l- being inspired, reading about documentary history and I don't remember the name of the book, but it was that we've all read it. It's like real thin, white cover, yellow and black, and it's like the history of documentary and like reading about Robert Flaherty, reading about all the films, the Seven Up series, all the. And it was kind of a self-education, and then I went to Mongolia out of love for travel and the world, and then I came back learned to use it was Final Cut at the time is what we were using and then I had a great relationship with I've developed a relationship with my local PBS station, KVIE Sacramento. And if you live in a small town, you think, God, I'm so screwed. I don't live in New York or LA. Actually, there are some advantages, it turns out. You can go and knock on the door at your PBS station and say, hey, will you broadcast my crappy film about Mongolia? Or can you watch it and tell me why you won't broadcast it so I can make all the 100 changes you request and then broadcast? So that's what happened. I sent them something terrible. It was an hour. And he said, Michael Sanford, who's now still at the station. I just talked to him recently to figure out, to hear what's happening with the PBS drama right now federally. But he told, he's still there, and he said, Keith, this film's not good. But here are some notes. And he did not expect me to come back a month later having made all the notes. And he said, if you can cut this to 26 minutes and 46 seconds, we'll broadcast it. And in fact, if you want to do a national broadcast, there's this thing called NETA where you can submit your film and they might broadcast it nationally. And I remember exactly where I was the moment I got the email from Bob Petz at NETA to that I had secured a national broadcast. And then from there, I was hooked. And it was like, this is my career. I quit my job. I actually worked at the California state legislature in Sacramento. I had a good job. I was a legislative director. I'd gotten a couple bills signed by at the time Governor Schwarzenegger. And I thought that was my career. I was going to be an attorney. And but then I got really sucked into film. And you know what? Doug, I started my career in 2008, 2009, and it was the worst time to start a documentary. I mean, it might feel like
Yeah.
right now it feels like, oh my God, guys, we're screwed. That was a hard time too. And I think that difficulty really forced me to be so creative and have hustle in a way that I think is necessary now. And I think it was that sort of that circuitous choice of like I didn't go into a documentary because it was the plan. I went into documentary because I fell in love with it. And I'm still in love with it 20 years, 18 years later.
So how did you, you talked a little about learning editing and stuff like that. So that cuts cost. But did you just completely self-fund this first film?
Yeah,
You,
first film we did probably I mean, Mongolia, luckily at the time was pretty cheap. Flying round trip flights from SFO to Ulaanbaatar weren't too expensive, the capital
you,
of
you
Mongolia.
shot,
And
you
then
shot
edited.
and edited.
Didn't
Okay.
really do color correction, used, Apple Color, like the kind of built-in, baked-in Final Cut,
Hmm.
programming. And then we did have some friends who were sound people because the sound sucked. We just don't know what we were doing. Sound, I got really passionate about sound. I actually ended up, doing really being focused on field sound, and I love that. And to this day, my dream in production is to not be a camera person or DP. That's not my talent, but I love people and I love getting in the mix. And a good sound person has to be that fly on the wall and make that connection with the subject. And I love that. So we had some friends who were musicians who did some sound work for us, but yeah, we just kind of scrapped it together, and it was and we made it work. And PBS gave us our start. It gave me confidence. You know, we didn't make any money. As you know, NIDA doesn't pay anything. I didn't get any underwriters the first time around. I didn't even know about underwriting at that time. Where you can,
Nor did Flaherty.
no, well, but you know who did? Ken Burns. And Ken Burns, I love there's a podcast called How I Built This, and there's an interview with Ken Burns about Florentine Films, his company. And if you skip forward, you know, it's a good interview in general, but an hour in, he talks about making his first documentary, Brooklyn Bridge, and he talked about getting underwriting. And he talks about getting underwriting from what became AT&T. They called it something else at the time. And basically telling the company that he was going to have this national broadcast before he secured it officially, but knowing he had a great story that would appeal to New Yorkers about the Brooklyn Bridge, and he was able to get underwriting and get that done. And that was also an inspiration.
So you're, I guess, best known in terms of your own producing work for the Age of Champions, because that's, when you sort of famously talked about all the money you raised for it.
Yeah.
That's like, I think, what year is that? 2016 maybe, or somewhere
No,
in that.
before that, we produced in 2010, 11, and then it released 20, really until 2014.
Okay.
2014. Yeah. So it's a long time ago.
So was there anything between that sort of Mongolian first film and Age of Champions that
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was a film about that was ITVS funded that was about the Uyghurs, the Turkic Muslim ethnic group in far western China in the Xinjiang region. That's in the news mostly because of forced labor, and it's a deeply segregated, really difficult uh, situation, human rights violations everywhere. And that film was about a baseball team, a multi-ethnic baseball team where the Chinese and the Uyghur teams played together on one team, even though they hated each other. It was a cool film, and ITVS funded it. So my heart breaks for what ITVS is going through right now. And that film was a big education also. It was a verite film, and it was a big education working with ITVS and working with PBS in a more kind of the NIDA. I love NIDA, but it is a little more relaxed. ITVS is way more, like, it was intense. I learned how to make a budget, to really stick to a timeline.
you learned how to keep every receipt, right?
It wasn't fun. I'll put that. It
No,
was not fun. I always,
no.
whenever I talk to someone who's got an ITVS grant, I'm like, congratulations, good luck. The administrative side of it's tough, but those are important skills to learn too.
Um, so let's talk about Age of Champions and what you learned from it, because it feels like there's almost a direct line between that and show and tell,
Yeah.
and putting the lessons you learned from that into show and tell. So I'm curious what the big takeaways were for people who don't know about Age of Champions.
So, Age of Champions well, it'll always be a big part of me. And that was a very formative time in my documentary career. I had such a wonderful experience making the film, premiering it at Silver Docs, now AFI Docs in
I'm sorry,
DC.
Keith, for those who don't know, explain what the film is.
The film follows athletes that compete at the Senior Olympics, from a 100-year-old tennis player to an 86-year-old pole vaulter, his 89-year-old arch rival, a team of Granny basketball players. In the film, it's interesting, like, recounting it. I mean, here's the pitch. I mean, the pitch used to be what I just said. That's when I first started. The film's about this and this and this. But one key lesson I learned as I started relationships with what made this Age of Champions a case study in the documentary field and still discussed today is we made partnerships with AARP. We prioritized conferences. We did over 3,000 community screenings, and we made $1.5 million on a $300,000 film. And the pitch for that film really changed a lot as we got more effective. It went from, my film is about this 100-year-old, 87-year-old team of Granny basketball players, to, our film follows a handful of incredible senior athletes, 60 and 60 plus, and focuses on telling inspiring stories around active aging and redefining what it means to get older. And focusing on, so having the pitch be, it's been a long time since I pitched it. It's better than that, but it's basically the idea is it's not what your film is about. It's about what your film is about and what themes and topics it really touches on. And when I understood that, there were partners and organizations that really cared about the message of the film, not just the story, but the message of the film, that's when things really changed. That's what really clicked. And I want to be really clear to everyone too. It wasn't just rainbows and sunshine for the distribution of Age of Champions. First 6 months after AFI docs was very disappointing and disheartening. And I almost took a deal that would have made it obscure and no one would have ever seen it or talked
And
about it.
Keith, is part of the reason because you were looking for the traditional theatrical distributor model?
Absolutely. I was
Yeah.
doing what I preach against now. And so I almost took that deal out of desperation and fear and also a lack of interest in a film that was the runner-up for the audience award winner at AFI Docs and which is a great festival but not one of the top festivals. And we a lot of us find ourselves in that position. We premiere at Doc NYC, which is a great fest, or we premiere at wherever, and it's just we're not going to get that deal. And so I hired Peter Broderick, and I remember writing those big checks and thinking, boy, this better help. And so I'm very empathetic to filmmakers that work that feel that way when they work with me, frankly. And I think that what I what I learned from Peter was I needed to really focus on the unique attributes of my film and come up with a unique distribution plan. And we did that, but it took 6 months to start clicking. And I played to several empty theaters that I four-walled. I lost a lot of money and lost a lot of optimism that I was on the right track. But it was frankly what changed everything was a conversation in a locker room after a morning run and workout in Sacramento, and I was lamenting about some failure. And if someone down the locker, a few doors down, someone I knew kind of loosely, this guy Eric, he says, "Oh, I work at a senior living home down the street. I do the marketing for them. Come show your film at our place. We'll show, kind of a pity thing, really." And when
Yeah,
we showed it there, it was like the clouds parted. It was like,
yeah,
whoa,
yeah.
not just for the residents, but the staff. They were like, wow, this is exactly what we're talking about. This is what we're trying to share with our residents that you can get up and walk. You can get out and play. You can be active. And the film, they clamored about it in a way that I'd never seen. And it was like, huh, okay, well, let's test another one. So I proactively reached out to another senior living community. Then I reached out to the Association of Senior Communities. Then I went to the conference for those senior communities. And then it just exploded. And so it was very circuitous.
What's so interesting is, I mean, we talk a lot about having these plans from the very beginning and working on them as we're making our films, but this is 6 months into it, and you're still, and it really just, the plan just formulates that far down the line, which is actually quite encouraging to hear.
It is encouraging, but one thing I would say to filmmakers, and it's something I talk about a lot, and I'm actually overdue on a draft to get to Peter because we're doing a bulletin on this. We did a webinar a month ago, Peter and I, about pre-distribution and this idea of dynamic distribution. And if you want to watch the recording, send me an email. I'll put it in the chat, and I'll get it to you. But the one of the key things about navigating distribution today is avoiding that 6 months of failure and losing money because most
Sure.
filmmakers give up at that point. And it is encouraging in that it's like, okay, 6 months of hell, and maybe you'll, but it's also risky because I know a lot of filmmakers don't make it past that hump. And so our advice with this concept of pre-distribution is just like we would never do production without pre-production. You should never approach distribution without pre-distribution. Pre-distribution can be super inexpensive, not too time consuming, but it's essentially a basic process of hypothesizing about who your film is for, how to position your film, and experiment and talk to real people. Most filmmakers I talk to who I don't get to support until they're at festival, they haven't really thought about or even tested their audience hypothesis about like, hey, I think my film's about this group of people. And then I say, oh, great. What are you basing that on? How do, well, I'm just, that's what it's about. Or it's not like, oh, I've done a focus group screening, which sucks. I hate doing those. Or I've shared a work in progress, or I've talked to a potential partner or supporter who's in that world. And so I really encourage people to have this concept of pre-distribution. You can define it however you want in your head, but the basic idea is there are certain steps before you get to distribution we should take. They're inexpensive. It really just takes vulnerability and carving out a little bit of time and being willing to engage folks before our films are done and before we're ready to release them.
Well, this is a good time to tell people that on Thursday, on the 15th, you're doing a special webinar, show and tell, free, on targeting your audience. Um, and I'll leap ahead. I want to go back to your path, but since we're talking about audience, what do you say to documentary filmmakers whose audiences are not obvious? Because it's not a social issue film per se. It's, more story and character driven. And maybe there's, it touches on something social. Maybe the protagonist is a teacher, for instance, and their her job is threatened, So it has that, but even then, well, how does somebody, a filmmaker who just thinks, wow, everybody will love my film because it's a human drama, and I'm a great filmmaker, how do they um, find a target audience and get to that audience?
You know, that filmmaker is fucked. I mean, I'll just put it blunt. They're going to be screwed until they figure out in a more nuanced way who their film is for. Even a massive studio with unlimited budgets for a marketing campaign, they don't always they don't always have a success when it comes to promoting their films to a general audience with near, in our opinion, from an independent filmmaker standpoint, near infinite resources, hundreds of millions of dollars. There are flops all the time. With independent filmmakers like us, and these are, I'm talking studios with big microphones. With filmmakers like us, independent filmmakers, our microphone's like this. It's tiny. It's a little tiny thing. And so we have to be more precise about how we use our little microphones. And uh, we have to think, about why is our film unique and who's our unique audience. And I always would recommend a filmmaker think who would be thrilled about your film, not excited, not open to watching it if they stumble upon it, if it's served up on their algorithm, but who would be thrilled to watch the film, so much so that they might share it with a colleague or a friend or a family member. Who is that person? Like, describe them, not just female, college educated, in more nuance. Where do they live? What's their profession? What are their hobbies? Think about this in a critical way, and then go find one of those people and talk to them. You don't even have to show them a trailer. You can just talk to them and be like, hey, I'm making this film about this. What do you think? I tell filmmakers, a lot of filmmakers that come to me, sometimes they're crestfallen because they had ideas of this grandeur about their audience, huge general audience, change the world. And what sometimes happens, and probably some of the filmmakers I like working with most are the filmmakers that have that reality, had reality face them, that that's not true. That as independent filmmakers, our films can nudge the world in the right direction. We can change the world, especially if we're reaching the right people. Um, but we have to be really strategic about it because we have so limited resources and time. And to your question, Doug, about what about the film that's like a verite film, the example you gave, what if it's a verite style film, a personal doc, maybe even a personal bio doc about someone telling their own story or a family member story? They're a teacher, they're struggling this. I mean, you just said who your audience might be. And here's the thing. Other teachers might not be interested in the film, even though that's who's featured. It might be the administrators. It might be the philanthropic organizations that support schools because often government funding is not enough. It might be PTAs. It might be just moms that are members of PTAs. There's so many surprises in audiences. And I've helped so many filmmakers with films about topics that you would think are so obscure and so difficult for distribution. They're not an on the nose film about teen mental health or a film about the Senior Olympics. They're films about someone looking for their dad because they learned that they were sperm donor conceived when they were 30 years old. That film, Thank You for Coming, that film is a poem. It's not an advocacy film. There's not one talking head in it. It is just so it's like I honestly remember watching it and thinking, like, can I help this person? Because this is early in my career. I'm like, can I help this person? It was actually the first film that Peter Broderick sent to me to say, Keith, you should try to help this. Try to help Sarah. And that film was challenging. It felt more like art than advocacy a hundredfold. But we were able to, after a couple stumbles, we thought, oh, well, this film's about complex family dynamics because of this revelation that your parents aren't your parents, and your parents aren't your biological parents, and then we thought, oh, well, marriage and family therapists, oh, other people that are donor conceived, oh, wrong, wrong, and the audience we found was the genealogy world, and we found that because we went to a conference on our own dime and met with a bunch of people who were thrilled about it. We brought the trailer on an iPad with a couple AirPods. Actually, it was before AirPods. It was quite a few years ago. It was like it was some headphones, and it was like, let's watch this. Let's talk about. And you know what? Out of that assumption that genealogists and genealogy worlds are our audience, we connected with 23andMe, and they became this amazing partner that put up hundreds of thousands of dollars and really fueled the distribution. But we also did so much great impact work in the genealogy world. So it's a beautiful film. And oh, Angie, hello. Angie, one of the heads of NIDA is here. Hello. I'm going to email you. So that film was on NIDA. It did so well. And, but Sarah felt so, and here's what I want to say that's so important. I talk about money a lot. We made, I don't know, $450,000 or so with that film. And Sarah's expectation, she had premiered at Doc NYC. She'd won a couple awards. Her expectation was, I would like to make $75,000, which is what I personally put into it, not counting her time. That's just paying the colorist and the sound person, and we exceeded that expectation, but it took time and it took creativity and it took a hell of a lot of pivoting because we were wrong about our audiences a couple times. So for the films that seem so obscure, you just have to know and have faith that our film has an audience. If we're so fatalistic and think like, well, my film is too obscure, it's too personal, no one's gonna, that's not true. You have to have optimism. Making film is it's an optimistic act to make a documentary. You have to have a lot of faith. And I think putting some of that faith into knowing my film has an audience, and then I just have to do the work to figure out who that audience is.
Yeah.
And a lot of us give up before we try.
Well, I mean, I could dig a lot deeper into audience. You'll be going into more detail next Thursday, so I don't want to focus too much on that. But it does leave open the question, okay, you talk to some people and they sound like they love the story and they're very enthusiastic about it. It's not totally clear to me unless I'm doing a crowdfunding campaign and, just want to, ask people to spread the word about it and have something, almost a specific ask like that. You talked about sort of finding an organization that was a result of almost doing survey-like probing. But what, you know, it's not obvious to me. Let's go back to this character story-driven film. Where seeing that people are interested, only confirms my thinking that this is like a great general audience film and not only for a targeted audience. And I guess where I'm going with this is, we know that if a film, I mean, lots of documentary filmmakers aren't, it's not their mission to save the world with their films. They're onto a great story. And
Mhm.
they want to be filmmakers. They want a career as directors telling great stories, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. And in the past, there's been a fairly clear path that you try and get some form of theatrical distribution, if only to get reviews, get attention, get some buzz,
Mhm.
awards consideration, to help you fund your next film. What is, if we're now being told, wow, we need to find really narrow targets and find those organizations and partners and do conferences and screenings that are, for those audiences and don't, there isn't theatrical like there used to be. There aren't even DVDs like there used to be. How do you build a career then? If you're a first-time filmmaker or you're an emerging filmmaker and you're trying to build a career, how do you even show success to a future funder?
Well, I think, metrics are really interesting. You know, I think we as filmmakers have to ask ourselves what is the right path and what are the right priorities for us? And I learned a lesson about PR recently that although I got one of the films I'm distributing, ASD Band the movie, although I got the band on the Kelly Clarkson show with a lot of hustle and a little luck, um, it did not translate into much distribution success. It was really challenging to translate traditional PR on CNN, Associated Press, AP, and then the Kelly Clarkson show into success. And one of the strategic errors I made with that film was not focusing more on niche press outlets for that film, which is about a band where everyone is on the autism spectrum. And we sometimes focus more on getting a quote from Variety magazine or Hollywood Reporter than a quote or press in a more niche outlet that is really going to tap into our audience. And so, with Age of Champions, I remember I met Diane Sawyer, I was on World Weekly News, I met Sanjay Gupta on CNN, I did an interview with Rachel Martin on NPR, and then I had the national broadcast on public television. And it was so interesting. Every time those different things happened, I kept thinking like, oh man, I'm going to get this huge spike in emails on my email list, on license sales and inquiries for events. It didn't really ever translate, not for any of them. And I don't regret doing any of them, especially the public television broadcast was really helpful for my career. But when I got press in a industry magazine for senior living communities called Leading Age, and they actually gave us a full page artwork, and then there was a web link, and then a little article. It was like it was gangbusters. It was like so many people came to the website, so much. But I was bragging about meeting Diane Sawyer at cocktail parties. I wasn't bragging about Leading Age, a full page in Leading Age. No one cares about that. So I think there's a difference between kind of the vanity and the results. And so when it comes to your question about, well, how do we show that we're a great filmmaker if if the vanity stuff doesn't also lead to results? So you're saying we have to do two side-by-side things? Oh my God, Keith, that's so much more work. Well, what I would say is it's one of the reasons I love public television. And I think public television, because the streamers have created this vacuum of demand for independent films, I think public television has a really important role. I mean, look, they've acquired more films out of Sundance in the last couple of years than they have in a long time. They had the Best Picture, 20 Days in Marpole was an acquisition from PBS. They had a great film at Sundance this last year about, oh gosh, I forget her name. She's the actress, the hearing impaired, the deaf actress.
Mary Matlin,
Amazing, like what a great story. And
right?
and
Yeah.
that's PBS as well. And I just feel like public television is really important and Trump can't kill him. Trump can't kill public television. We can talk about that more. It's been really harmful. And Angie, I'd love to talk to you about what you're seeing. And I've been seeing some things that are disheartening, but I know that public television is a large decentralized network that is resilient. And I will tell you what's helped my career is saying that I've had 3 films broadcast through public television, and that to funders who tend to be older, who tend to have the moolah, they see that as a endorsement of quality that far surpasses any brag I have about festivals, any I have about press I've gotten. The other thing that I use when I'm fundraising for my films, and I advise filmmakers to do, is you don't need a Hollywood Reporter quote. Talk about your impact. I think impact is actually one of the best ways to articulating and achieving some impact is one of the most effective ways to fundraise. In fact, I'm doing a webinar on that in about a month with the Impact Producer Alliance. I've seen filmmakers with concise and simple impact campaigns. They don't have to be a big nonprofit. I'm talking a one-person band who's making a film, dealing with fundraising, raising their kids, and running an impact campaign. Like I've seen this, the one woman band.
Can you give like an example of like demonstrating the impact you have with your film? Like some of the measurable results that would be impressive to funders.
I mean, the one of the films I'm leading the distribution on right now is My Ascension about teen mental health and suicide prevention. And with that film, the simple impact proof is that we've worked with a number of children's hospitals around the country where the film is being used for training for healthcare providers, where the film is being used to engage the public and raise awareness for suicide prevention matters and efforts. And you know, there are several films about that topic that are out there, but I think our film has gone further than most because we aren't just getting traditional releases. We're not just going to festivals. We're not just going to public television, but we're doing those and we're working with the people who are actually providing mental health support. And our film has become a useful tool for them. So I'm doing this again also with another film I'm distributing, ASD Band the Movie, about the band where everyone's on the autism spectrum. We're working with ABA therapy, applied behavioral analysis therapy, organizations around the country where the film is being used for an inspiring message to show that people on the spectrum can be creative, can, have friends, can develop relationships in beautiful, meaningful ways. We see this in other media like Love on the Spectrum. And I'm not saying that all of that is perfect, and there is some controversy around this, but in discussion, which should be had. But at the same time, this film it's not an issue film. It's just a film showing a handful of kids making music who just happen to be on the spectrum and talk about how challenging that is and how rewarding it is. So I do think that emphasizing impact and showing, I mean, really being able to articulate, hey, my film is for this audience. We worked with this audience. These are some of the results where we worked, and you don't have to say 62% of parents now understand this. I don't believe in that stuff. I like to just say, my film is for this community. We engaged this community, and our film was useful to them in the important work they do. And the best funders I've found, and most success I've had with fundraising, is when I go to the funders who, in their giving, have a track record of supporting those issues, whether it's mental health, whether it's autism acceptance, and I see that they've been giving to these places, and I say, this is what our film touches on. Age of Champions isn't about a 101-year-old tennis player. Age of Champions is about active aging. I see in your giving, you're passionate about and focused on active aging. Our film furthers messages related to that. Perhaps we can work together.
Yeah.
That's to me a more compelling and nuanced and specific, that's targeted fundraising. That's fundraising to the communities that care about the issues related to your film. And that goes to films that aren't issue oriented, that are verite, that are personal in nature. Absolutely.
Yeah. I promised folks that we would give plenty of time for you to ask your questions. So if you use the raised hand function to put your hand up, I will very soon call on you, even though I think I have about 3 pages of questions left for Keith myself. So we always have that as backup. Um, Two questions occurred to me. First, with PBS threatened the way it is, and its future so uncertain, um, a lot of fundraising is going after, and certainly the kind that um, try to inspire is going after corporate underwriting and partnerships, um, and underwriting in particular for PBS, or with the possibility of PBS being, the major outlet for distribution. If that is no longer a possibility, or if these potential partners feel like, oh, I don't even know if PBS is going to be out there, what do we do now when we're approaching potential partners in terms of where we think our films will make an impact? Because that's a major one. Um, Theatrical distribution, as we say, is not, is very tough. It's not impossible, but it's tough, takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
So what would you tell filmmakers now?
Absolutely. Well, let me just say one thing about theatrical too. I don't think theatrical is dead, but I do think the way theatrical has been done in the past is dead. I don't believe any filmmaker who comes to me and says they want to go do a qualifying run. I say, so you want to pay a PR firm 50 to $70,000 because you have that much money wasted that to waste essentially. I don't believe in traditional theatrical runs. But I do believe in our films being honored on the silver screen, and I do believe in theatrical releases of our films in strategic ways that geographically reflect who our target audiences are, with partners on the ground who can fill the theaters and put butts in the seats. And I've seen that happen a lot. There's a filmmaker here in this audience, Dana and Chris Anna, their film Rescued Hearts. Their film is really connecting with people who have a passion for
Yeah,
curiosity about and connection to horses, and
yeah,
the special connection between people and horses. And their film's gonna be on the big screen, but in certain cities for limited times, sometimes one night with a special event, and it's going to be a great part of their strategy. So I do think that's possible.
yeah,
With public television, part of what makes public television so freaking confusing and hard to work with, and I've gone to the PBS annual conference and talked to people who work at PBS who are wrong when I ask them a question. Like, hey, are my underwriting messages going to be streamed on the Passport app or on? I've been told no, and I'm like, yeah, it does. So I'm not to belittle people that work at public television because I love them and I work with them, and I am so sad to hear about what's happening at the World Channel and ITVS and others. What I would say is that what makes public television challenging to work with is also a strength. It's deeply decentralized. There are 300 plus stations around the country, some of which receive zero federal funding. Most of the stations in California receive zero. So Marjorie Taylor Greene can try all she wants. And you know what? The state legislature might have to step up because they don't put any money. Our state of California and all the money we spend, we don't put any money into public television. And maybe we should. If we care so much about public television being taxed by the federal government, maybe states need to step up. And there are even some conservative states that are attacking PBS too, like Indiana, but there are some that are stepping up as well to support public television and will because a lot of conservative people like public television too. I actually think the biggest threat to public television is not, it's actually not the Trump administration. The biggest threat to public television is that television is struggling. And I think it was in 2022, I saw at the PBS annual meeting that in 2022, viewers online for PBS content matched viewers on linear television for the first time, and that trend is going to grow. So linear television is struggling, not just PBS, but everyone. The audiences are getting older and they're getting generally smaller. So I think that there are other existential risks with public television. I do think in the immediate and medium term, it's going to be essential for independent filmmakers, and hopefully in the long term as well. I have faith that PBS will be stronger in 10 years than it is today, because it'll be more digital. It'll have to make some adaptations. The reason I'm distributing three films, I'm not a distributor, but the reason I'm distributing three films is because I don't know the answer to your question, Doug, of what is, with if underwriting becomes a smaller piece of the pie for a successful independent documentary distribution strategy, what is filling that void? And I don't know the answer. I have some ideas and some things I'm experimenting with, but that's the reason I'm distributing three films, is because I want to know how we independent filmmakers should be distributing films and releasing them into the world and generating revenue and impact in a few years. And I do think underwriting budgets will go down because television advertising budgets are going down. That's just the reality. And so we do have to already start thinking about what else. The only way to do it, I mean, I always loved teachers who also were doing things, and that's my role at Show and Tell. I haven't really talked about Show and Tell that much. I am a teacher, I'm a guide, I'm a coach. I help filmmakers navigate fundraising and distribution. And when I was growing up and in college and high school and beyond, it's like I really respected teachers that were doing things in the field. It made their teaching more current, more relevant, more relatable. And that's why I'm trying, Doug, to answer that question as best I can. There are certain things that have been working, like virtual toolkits with my Ascension and creating custom large scale educational resources, special virtual events with interesting experiences. These are things that are helping and working. But distribution will look different in 2 years than it looks today.
Yeah. Backing up a bit, you mentioned you hired Peter Broderick for Age of Champions. How did you get to the point of like having paying Peter and then partnering with Peter, um, which I assume kind of was the in-between point to show and tell, right? Or
It
led
was,
show and tell? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was. Basically when I mean, there were a couple things that happened. My first two films were really verite heavy. It was a big for those of you who made a verite film, especially in a foreign country, you really are taken out of your life for a while. And so I spent a lot of time traveling for the first few years of my career, my producing career. And, I was approaching 30 at the time and soon to get married, and it was putting strains on our relationship. My producing partner and I at the time also had a professional divorce, I'll say, and we went separate ways. And Peter, I don't know how he heard it, but he reached out to me and said, "Hey, Keith, I heard you're available. Would you want to consult with me?" And I had never considered that ever. And I always thought, I'm going to make, what's my next film going to be? And who am I going to work with? Because I was
So
like,
Peter was consulting with you and then asked you to consult with him.
yeah, yeah. He was like,
Okay.
"Hey, I have more filmmakers that want to work with me than I can work with." And then I think Peter is so God knowledgeable and he's a dear, dear friend. I do bring a different approach to consulting because I'm a filmmaker that has executed these strategies. And, Peter's overseen more projects than I have, but soup to nuts hasn't executed. So we bring like a very complementary thing. So we actually consulted in tandem together for several years. I learned a ton, and I think he learned some things from me too. And I think it made us both better at our jobs. And then I started show and tell because I I wasn't enamored with the kind of one-on-one consulting sort of format. I found myself repeating what I said a lot and charging a lot for it. And so I liked my theory behind show and tell is that if I put as much information in out there, that there will be this baseline of understanding about audiences, about partnerships, about conferences, about strategies that I don't want filmmakers to pay me $500 an hour to hear these things I'm talking about with every filmmaker. So I'm going to put those all out there so that it's going to force filmmakers and me to be more innovative and to think like, well, okay, so we all know this. So what else can we learn? What else can we do to hopefully take things further? Because we do need to go further. Everything we're doing now is great, but it's not enough. It's not enough for enough filmmakers too. And so that's my theory with show and tell is to we've done 170 webinars and over half of them have been free and open to the public, as is the one I'll put in the chat right now. And on target audiences I'm doing next Thursday with D-Word. And it's to me, it's important to have more innovation and creativity in documentary distribution and fundraising. And I always say, if we filmmakers could put a fraction of our creative energy that we put in the making of our film into our release of our film, we'd be in a lot better place.
Um, yeah, go ahead and put the thing in the chat. I don't know how you put stuff in the chat while you're talking, Keith. That's an
I'm a
amazing
parent.
talent.
I'm a multitasker.
Yeah. Um, Ethan, I see you have your hand up and been waiting patiently, so go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Um, I actually wanted to ask you about the producing partner that you alluded to. I wanted to hear about, since this is a personal seminar for the first time with you, wanted to hear about your relationship with Christopher Rufo and how you first ended up working together and how you ended up going your separate ways.
Or
Got me
not,
very
Keith,
curious.
but you know.
It's
Unless you
okay.
don't want to
I'll do
discuss
it.
it,
I
and
don't
that's
love
fine.
talking about it. Honestly, it's like one of the tragedies of my life, frankly. And but I will answer your question. So Ethan, he and I knew each other from high school. We were 13 when we met, and he was a great friend for a long time and a great person. And we started hitting some friction during what was our fourth film we were producing together. And there were some differences in opinions and uh not to the degree that there are now, but it became clear that we weren't working well together. Trust was trust was damaged, and we ended up having, I would say, an unamicable split, and attorneys involved, and we haven't talked since then, 2017. So that's where it ended, and to see what's happened since is it's not the person I knew.
Yeah. Hey, Amanda, how are you?
Hi, Doug. I'm good. Hey, Keith. It's so lovely to meet you. Thanks for doing this. It's incredibly helpful. I am, yeah, what I'm doing it doesn't really isn't relevant. Can you talk about funding for this piece of it, funding for impact, funding for direct distribution? Sort of, I'm done with the funding of my film. Now I'm looking at this piece. What kinds of avenues are there? Are there avenues that you've seen where folks are also tapping into what's going to become audience? This is a thing I'm thinking about right now. Is like some big partners that we're looking at that have disaggregated communities and being like, how can you guys help me make this happen for you, kind of thing. So anyway, just sort of
Give,
broadly talking
give me
about
a
funding
little,
for
give
that
me a
piece.
little bit more. I mean, I'd be happy to answer from there, but to be more useful to you, give me a little more information. Give me a little
Well,
specific.
let me just
So,
butt in and say
oh,
Amanda is producing two films, like The Bones and Sons of Detroit, which is not
it's true.
out yet, but is like an incredibly great film.
Thanks. Doug is my personal advocate everywhere I go. I'm
Yes,
just trying to
because
bring Doug.
you will not
Um,
practice shameless self-promotion, I
yeah,
guess.
exactly. Okay, right. I'm supposed to be doing that. So shamelessly self-promoting. I have my co-EP on a film called The Bones that is done with its festival life, and we actually the main producer on it is managing to claw back rights from a major sales agent, so we can pull them back for North America, which is very exciting. So we're like that film is done. We're looking into direct distribution stuff. It's about the international dinosaur bone trade, so there's lots of clear audience on this. We're looking at partnering with natural history museums. We're looking at, there's huge social media influencers in the dinosaur space. Sure, it's amazing. So that like has a pretty clear audience that we're at that phase where we're really trying to figure it out. Sons of Detroit, totally different kind of film. It's that touches on big themes around race and belonging and sort of talking across difference. That film to take your that's my new pitch that I just made up right now. Keith, it's like
Good. I
totally
like it. That's
thematic and
good.
not story at all. Um, and that film we're like in very late post, we're out to festivals and waiting for the sort of starting the festival thing and then looking further along the line. But I'm also starting on impact with that now and talking to organizations. So the specifics on that is so, for example, one of the core audiences that we're looking at for that film is organizations, especially directed at white people who are working in social justice and cross-racial stuff. So there's some really big organizations, white progressives are like in that space. The film is a tool to help people have conversations across difference that they might be uncomfortable having. There's a white guy at the center of it who does a lot of that work, right? So I'm thinking about like, how do I both reach out to you and say, hey, I want to partner with you and have this go out to your community, but also like, you certainly have people with money in your community that could help us get this funded, right? So you see where I'm going with this. It's sort of like
Yeah.
kind of two for
There's a couple techniques that I'll share that'll be useful for all of you. You know, uh, these are hard lessons I've learned myself. Two things I would say. One, proof of concept and proactively try to replicate that. Find what I call your template that you can replicate. So with your illicit archaeological bone trade documentary, which is incredible. Send me an email about that too, because I've worked on another film related to that. I'd like to talk to you about. But and also I'm a big dinosaur person since I was a kid, but as most little boys are. So what I would say is that with that film, you should reach out to a science museum or natural history museum that is the easiest sell, like the local one or the one that has the biggest exhibit on this issue, not just dinosaurs, but on this issue of smuggling. One of my favorite documentaries of all time is called Genesis 2.0 about the illicit woolly mammoth tusk trade in the taigas north of Russia. Amazing film. Oh, I want to watch it again now. And so I know there are institutions that do awareness, do work around this. Find out who that easiest sell is, get them on board, even if they don't put $1 towards what you're doing. Get them to endorse you, get a quote from them. Screw a Hollywood Reporter quote, get a quote from the museum director or the someone involved there, and then use that as your calling card and proactively reach out to others that might have a budget. Look at who are the funders of those museums. Look at whose names are carved into the marble wall in the lobby. Reach out to them. These are foundations. You're not going to see the Ford Foundation on there, but what you're going to see are a bunch of philanthropies and rich people who care about natural history and dinosaur bones and preserving them for future generations and scientific knowledge. And those people, when they learn about your film, are going to be way more likely to fund you than the Ford Foundation. And so I did that with the film. it was about upward mobility and intergenerational poverty. I had a meeting at the Brookings Institution, a think tank in DC, and they're like, "Yeah, this film sounds great. Yeah, cool. Keep us posted when it's done." Well, we were in production still. And as I was walking out of the Brookings Institution, I took a picture of the names carved into their lobby wall, all their donors, and I reached out to all of them. And guess what? That photo led to almost $630,000 in funding for my film, still in production. So the second thing I would say for your film about anti-racism, targeting, you know, white people involved in those fights, what I would say is very similar. Your money is not going to come from those organizations. It's not. No matter how big and how many members, they don't have budget for you. They're fundraising all the time. So what you need to do is get some organizations to be on board, to want to do a screening, a virtual event, a training, whatever it might be, some sort of experience. And then I would, from there, I would uh, uh, figure out who their funders are. We were probably wealthy, obviously left-leaning philanthropists, rich people, and track them down. Every rich person wants a tax write-off, and 501c3 foundations are tax write-offs essentially. Not to be cynical, but that's what they are. And you can find what are called IRS Form 990s on the internet. They all have to be posted, and you can look up contact information for any philanthropy. So that's my advice. That goes across not just figuring out who your audience is, but also translating knowledge of who your audience is into actual fundraising. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Amanda, for
Yes,
asking.
super helpful. Yeah, thanks, Keith.
Speaking of someone who has made a theatrical success happen through hard work, Heather, welcome.
Hi, Keith. Thank you for doing this. I've been a long time follower of your career, and I think I read early on that you worked with Together Films, Sarah.
Yeah, Masa, I was just emailing with her yesterday.
Okay, so I think I read that once that you worked together with the Age of Champions, and I'm just curious because I know that kind of like was a aha moment for you, that film, and it really, as a case study, if anyone hasn't looked into that, it's like a wonderful like Genesis moment for self-distribution, outside the box thinking. And I've been following the story with that. And I was just curious, how did you guys work together on that first film? Was that something that started this process for you of outside the box thinking, or can you expound on that a little?
And specifically my work with
Yeah, with Together Films, because they also
Together, it's not Sarah and I are just kindred spirits, like Christy, like so many people in the documentary field who understand, who just see what I see, which is our films are not for everyone. Our films are for definable audiences, and our task as storytellers and as impact people like Sarah and her organization Together Films, our job is to be creative and flexible and dynamic about how to connect with those people. So I connected with Sarah on a couple fronts. One, in that shared understanding and passion for supporting documentary. I mean, Sarah and I could probably make better livings doing something else, but we're passionate about this and we care about this. The other thing that and we both kind of get that concept of our films have purpose, our films have value, no matter how, to Doug's question earlier, no matter how obscure you think your film is, no matter how, personal you think it is, and how limited your audience, your film has value. And Sarah and I shared that, and that passion and recognition. And then the second thing we share is we became parents at about the same time. She had a little girl a few months before I did.
Okay. Tommy, you're up.
2 weeks in a row. I'm hooked. Glad to be back. Thank you so much, Keith. Pleasure to get to know a good bit about you.
Nice to meet you, Tom.
Thank you, sir. I'm completing my first film. It's a documentary on Jason Molina, who's a quite obscure uh, musician. He's been passed away for almost 13 years now, 12 years. And so my question is, like, I hear so much about impact marketing and distribution and stuff like that. So like in terms of audience, I know I've got his fan base, which is small but rabid, geography, and then like music biopic lovers, but that doesn't sound like impact to me. Like impact sounds like social issues. Am I misconstruing that, or is it really no different than identifying uh an audience that's gonna that's gonna be thrilled to see it, as you said? And then a
I
quick
definitely
second.
think we need to have a really a different definition of impact, in my opinion. It's one of the reasons I recently joined the Global Impact Producer Alliances. I want to be a part of those conversations. I'm not going to, pretend like I can lead them, but I'd like to contribute to those conversations about what is impact. And to me, impact is is having your film seen. It's having your film discussed. It's having people understand what special magic you saw in the story that made you want to do something as foolish as make a documentary. It's like having people share that. And sometimes at the very least, documentary is one impact we can have, the most general, broad impact is to have a shared experience where we are watching a story, we're sharing a story, we're discussing a story, we're connecting about a story, and having a shared experience grows empathy. And that is an important impact and something we lack too much of today. And so, but I would ask yourself as you define your impact campaign, never be I don't think you should be apologetic about, well, I'm not changing legislation, I'm not saving lives here. But what you're doing is you're connecting people. And I think that is so deeply valuable and so deeply missing. Social media is not meaningful connection. Um, uh, but I do think that connecting over film, over the themes of our films, over the message of our films, these are ways that we can connect. So I believe in an expansive definition of impact, and I definitely think your film would meet that.
Right.
Is there a difference in approach? I mean, because I'm not like necessarily going to be reaching out to organizations that have a similar message. There is no similar message. So I'm just treating this as like micro audiences or someone
Gosh,
that can help elevate anyway.
there was a film I worked on about a somewhat well-known community of filmmakers called Windham Hill. That was big in the 80s and 90s. And that filmmaker was in one of my circle programs where I provided some real hands-on coaching. And what he's done that's so meaningful to him, impactful for him, and impactful for his community is he's connecting this disparate network of fans on Reddit, on Facebook, that, the disparate musicians that were part of that movement who now are teaching at music schools and are part of like chamber societies, and he's bringing them all together about this shared passion. And yeah, you could call it like just connecting a bunch of hobbyists and who people and but no, you're doing more than that. You're connecting people who share something, and it's a diverse group of people across the globe, and that's been really rewarding for him. And he ran a Kickstarter campaign connecting all those folks. He made over $100,000 on a $50,000 goal. And so not the and I'll put a link to his campaign. It's his name's Tall Skloot, wonderful, wonderful human, and editor. And you know, understanding who your film really resonates with. His film's called A Quiet Revolution. Understanding who your films resonate with aren't it's not just about then figuring out what's your impact campaign, but it could also just practically help you raise money. And that was true for Tall's film. I just put a link to his Kickstarter here. And that's the core of what I'm talking about next Thursday is how understanding our audience fuels everything else. It's the foundation that our homes are built on. If your distribution and your release is a home, the foundation is understanding your audience. If that's shaky and incomplete,
Yeah.
don't invest much in your house because it's not going to be successful. It's not going to stand.
Thank you so much.
We are getting close to the end of our session. Art and Cynthia, you'll ask your questions. We won't take any more questions from attendees. I'm going to wrap it up with one or two questions of my own, but we're coming down the backstretch. Art, you are up.
Okay, 안녕하세요.
Oh,
I wanted
안녕하세요.
as someone who spent 3 years working and living in Seoul, Korea, as well as Busan, when I heard that you were half Korean, I couldn't resist beginning with that. One.
Right.
Two, I was really amazed, and I want to say thank you for informing me that Nanook of the North was the first documentary film ever made, because I saw it when I was in undergraduate school, and I was pretty taken by that film. So thank you for informing me of the history of that film and its foundation with regard to documentary filmmaking. My question, I think you answered. I wanted to know what was GIPA, and I guess that's the Global Impact Producers Alliance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that you're all here and part of the FTF series is a great first step. Being a
Mm-hmm.
part of D-Word is essential if you're a documentary filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
Being a part of other filmmaker organizations, I think right now is really, I think we need to be stepping up our shared camaraderie and experience, even if they're difficult experiences. There's so much support in the documentary field and people who desire more support and connection. And frankly, the way I feel, and I don't know, this might be somewhat controversial, I think a lot of the documentary organizations I grew up with in 2006 when I started my career, I think a lot of those are dying and not really as supportive in ways that I found them once before. Like the IDA, I'm still a member. I'm a dues paying member. I've spoken at their conference. I've given a keynote. I got to meet Barbara Koppel, one of my heroes, Werner Herzog, one of my heroes from IDA events. I get their emails still. I just don't see them leading. The IFP was amazing. Now they're Gotham, and the spotlight on documentaries changed my career. I went multiple times, and I just don't sense that a lot of the legacy organizations are providing support for independent filmmakers the way that they may be used to. We're seeing that change from the top down, from Sundance shifting their work and struggling in their own way and moving. Um, and I want all of them to succeed. We need more support, not less, in documentaries. So I think organizations like who Heather mentioned, Together Films with Sarah Mosses. I love what Emily Best does with Seed and Spark. I love what GIPA, the Global Impact Producers Alliance, is doing and connecting impact producers, a lot of whom are filmmakers also, like myself. I love what the Documentary Producers Alliance is doing. Helen, who's a member and a board member here and attending the webinar, is involved. And, I on a couple committees for them. We need to step up and step into these organizations and be active and support each other because, frankly, it's not going to come from other places. Tax incentives aren't the answer for us. They weren't the kind of productions that are ever applying for those. So we're the kinds of productions that are getting made and getting into the world from our blood, sweat, and tears and our friends and our collaborators who are willing to barter with us, support us, be flexible, and be generous. And I think that's how you build those relationships. And that's why I do love going to festivals. I got to meet Doug at Slam Dance, and I went to the Illuminate Film Festival last week in Santa Barbara. I like going to festivals because I like connecting with other filmmakers. I like giving them a hug. I love talking to them, getting a coffee, and that's where relationships are born too. So I think networking is really important, not in like the tacky way, but in the way of building connections with like-minded people who can support each other.
Yeah. Thanks, Art. Cynthia, last question. You need to unmute, Cynthia.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Keith. By the way, I give a big shout out to Keith's program that you can join for really a reasonable amount of money, and you can get private seminars and all kinds of things every week. It's really a great resource.
Your check's in the mail, Cynthia. Your commission's in the mail. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I haven't talked much about show and tell, but I'm here to support filmmakers with documentary distribution and fundraising. And Cynthia's been a longtime member, so I see her in our member-only webinars. She has access to our library of over 200 lessons. I do something called The Circle, where I do more hands-on coaching. Jaquil, I saw your note about wanting to join the next one. We should talk. I've been wanting to work with you. We've had the pleasure of meeting in person. But to me, it's kind of what I was just talking about with art. It's about community. That's so important. I was craving that when the fires happened, and I was feeling kind of out of sorts. And I think that's what the D-Word offers. That's what FTF offers. And I loved hearing Tommy say this is the second week in a row now he's hooked. It's a great place to be on a Friday, Tommy. But Cynthia, I appreciate the kind words you say, and I appreciate you being a part of our community.
Okay, so I just wanted to say, because I know we're trying to wrap things up, but to Tommy, I'm also making a documentary about a relatively unknown musician. His name was Bruce Langhorne, but Bruce had so many interests. When I started looking at who my target audience were, there's Dylan fans because Bruce played with Dylan. There's folk music fans. There's old people. There's hot sauce lovers because Bruce had a hot sauce company. Um, you know, I just go down the list and there's like, he rescued dogs. So then that opened up, the best friend's animal. There's like so many things. So I'm glad to. If I sent you my phone number in a text in the chat box, feel free to call me, and I'm glad to, sort of give you a little support in how to. I'll just tell you one thing. Bruce Langhorne, you can probably raise your hands if you know who he is. Almost nobody, except for Doug. But probably how many people know
Giving away my age here, yeah.
Well, mine too. So has anybody ever heard the song Mr. Tambourine Man? Raise your hands. That's Bruce. So, there are ways in to get people to be aware of who your subject is and what their interests are. And it's a great opportunity to just really think outside the box. So this applies to everybody here. You just start thinking, anything about your subject area like Keith has done and found avenues that he didn't realize were going to be relevant to his particular films.
Yeah.
So I just support that, and I'm here as a resource.
Oh, I love that generosity, that generous spirit, Cynthia. That's why whenever I remember, I know who he is too, because I've reviewed your deck. I remember looking at your deck and learning about your film and the story you're telling and Bruce's story. And I it's one thing I love about Show and Tell is the more successful filmmakers are in our community, it seems like the more generous they are about sharing. There's a couple people in the audience now, like I mentioned Dana earlier, who I'm meeting with later today. In her film, God, they raised over 200, almost $300,000 before picture lock on their film, and she's like taking meetings with. She's busy, but she's taking meetings with show and tell members who have questions about like, oh, I heard you talk about the strategy and that. Tell me about that. And that generosity it's what we need right now. The learning is not coming in a top-down way. It's coming from within our communities. And that's the privilege I have with show and tell is that I get to see what other filmmakers are doing and I get to elevate their stories. And it's just been so rewarding. So thank you, Cynthia, for your generosity too.
Oh, I want to say one more thing. The first time after I signed up for the Show and Tell's year-long program, and Keith workshopped a 2-page deck that I was doing. And just in that 10 minutes of feedback, it totally transformed my deck and my approach. It made it much more simple and elegant. And anyhow, thank you to all of the people here who are helping everybody else.
Yeah. This is a good time to mention, Tommy was referring to his second time here. We tend to alternate on our Friday face-to-faces, what we call focused face-to-faces with guests like Keith, with much more informal ones, like we'll do next Friday, and like what Tommy was on last week, where a smaller group, usually somewhere between 30, 40, 50 people will come on, and we'll oftentimes go into smaller breakout rooms. And it's really just a way for us to meet each other, make connections, support each other in our work, have shoulders to cry on. Um, we certainly encourage you to come to those as well. I remember in a breakout room last week, we had a filmmaker from Nigeria doing wants to do a documentary on a famous, I forget his name, a very famous Nigerian chef. And one of the others, in a group of four, one of the others said, "I love this guy," started reciting all of his bio information, and they, are now collaborating, certainly intend to. And, it's just an example of the kinds of things that come out of these. Keith, let me sort of wrap this up by asking one or two questions. If you were starting out today as a filmmaker, given where the industry is now, and the kind of disruption going on in it, would you set out to make feature-length docs anymore? And if not, what would you do as an alternative to that? Would you focus on shorts? Would you look to go to YouTube and create a presence on another platform like that? What would you think of doing?
It's one of the highest purposes of my work I mean, my best calculation, there's about 30,000 documentary filmmakers in the world. I mean, that's just a rough guess based on, submissions at top festivals and things like that. And there's a lot of churn in our career. But I want documentary filmmakers. I want there to be 30,000 filmmakers or more in 5 or 10 years. And I am concerned that so much negativity is around in the talk around our field that talented storytellers may not want to become documentary filmmakers. And I think in this moment, documentary film is so, so, so very, very, very important because we're seeing traditional media get gutted. We're watching, political attacks on traditional media, deeply personal attacks from the president himself. And then we see also that investigative journalism is going away. And so making a documentary where we get embedded in a story, where we do something like devote ourselves to telling a complex story and showing all the shades of gray. And that's so important. And I think our world would be a much even more divided place if there were 15,000 documentary filmmakers in the world, or 10,000. So that's my highest purpose, is to show optimism and show a way forward for filmmakers. And the good news is that there are a lot of emerging filmmakers right now. And, in 2024 at Sundance, 40 out of 101 feature film directors were first-time filmmakers. It's about 40%, almost exactly. And I think that's a very encouraging sign. And I want to keep it that way and hopefully grow it. And so I just really think it's important for truth and for, the health of our very important work, that we move forward. I mean, I'm an environmentalist, and the documentary behind Silent Spring and books and authors and investigative journalists have created, the Environmental Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act, which are under attack now, but thank God they exist, and they will exist in some form in the future, and hopefully it'll be strengthened. But I think the reality is that we have an important role, and if the pessimism festers too much and the community is threatened too much, there will be fewer documentary filmmakers. And so when you ask me, Doug, would I get involved? I mean, I got involved in a really crappy time too. In 2006, I started production. 2008 is when we were really starting to think about distribution. And that was a really, really hard time. This is a hard time now. But I chose the field because I was proud to be a documentary filmmaker. I am proud to be a documentary filmmaker. when I meet other filmmakers, I immediately feel a camaraderie with them. And I would absolutely choose this field again. Of course I could make more money doing something else, but this is, our world is too precious to not want to make it a bit better. And I think as documentary filmmakers, we do nudge the world in the right direction, and I'm
Yeah.
so proud of that.
I couldn't agree with you more. But I guess my question was more on the feature length documentary, which is what so many filmmakers go in focused on. And I guess my question is a little more practical. It's like, do you still encourage filmmakers to make it, given how hard it is to get distribution for the feature these days? Or would you
Absolutely.
advise them to go to shorter form, do it directly for your target audience yeah.
That is a really important question. What is the right way to deliver our stories? Is serial content the way? Is a podcast the way? Is, a feature or an hour long? What I'm seeing is that the feature length is in less and less demand. And as a filmmaker, I killed myself trying to make a feature length. It's really hard. So, an hour-long television cut does have more utility. A 15-minute cut has different utility. But the truth is, I think the most important thing we as filmmakers need to do is tell a story that we're proud of, and that is the best story we can. So I do think a feature has value. It doesn't have as much impact and commercial value directly, I would say, than say an hour long or a shorter cut. But I do think a feature length is important in that it allows us as storytellers to tell the most important version of the story that we're passionate about. And I think that puts wind in our sails that we will need during
Yeah.
the distribution process. So I'd say make it. Maybe don't spend a lot of money on color correcting it and doing sound and doing all the post stuff and making it just the perfect little piece of art that we want to make, but make it. But know that you will in this distribution landscape have to do shorter cuts as well.
Final question, which is, well, first of all, tell us, for those who don't know what show and tell is, explain it a little bit more, but also where you see it going. I mean, like 5 years from now, what do you start to take on in, three at a time distribution? Do you see it evolving in a bigger way, in a different way? What's the plan, Keith?
I would love to stay small. I have a very small committed team. I have one full-time teammate and two part-time teammates. The bigger I am, the more management time I'm spending. And I want my experience to mimic as much the experience of an independent filmmaker. Meaning, if I had a big team and I was a big distributor and had all these resources and went into debt to like create this, like that, if I had a distribution success, it would also be a bit less relatable too, I think, because I'd have different tools at my disposal. So for me, I am choosing to be small. I want to stay small and I want to stay focused on one thing, and that's figuring out how most effectively we can fundraise and distribute for our films. The way I want to do that is by distributing a couple so I know what's working in 2025 and 2026. Like you asked earlier, Doug, like with public television in a television in a diminished state in the future, a clear trajectory, what remains? The answer is we don't know. No one knows. And so I need to be in the field that way. The second thing I would say too is Show and Tell is a company born out of COVID. 5 years ago, like when you guys started doing the FTF gatherings, and great things remain from the aftermath of COVID. But at the same time, I want to do more in-person gatherings. So I'm talking to some friends and allies that are doing good work in the space to do more in person. I love meeting people in person. And so that's something I would love to kind of pivot more towards doing our webinars because we're all over the world, but also offering ways to connect.
Great. Well, thank you, sir.
Thanks,
This has
Doug.
been great. I mean, tip of the iceberg, but it was such a pleasure meeting you the other month, and I'm glad our people have gotten a chance to get to know you a little bit better today.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
could not, for you folks out there, I could not recommend Show and Tell more. And Keith, thank you so much for all that you do for the documentary community.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Doug. And I'll put my info in the chat one last time, my email and my website. And I would recommend all of you step into our community as much as you can. The D-Word is the largest and most diverse part of this community, and I'm so grateful to do this with you today, Doug. Thank you, Julie, and thank you to the D-Word for making this possible and inviting me. And